You're listening to the Old Time Radio Show on 71K News Talk Radio. Now back to Denver's Old Time Radio history buff, John Dunning.
The entire run twice over there. We ran it 2 years. And as a result, an actor by the name of Bob Bailey became very well known in Denver. One of the things that we kept getting called about was, where is Bob Bailey, and is he still alive? What is he doing? And can we write to him? And I had no idea at that time where Bob Bailey was, but I was requested to send the series out to a station called KREX in Grand Junction. And I sent them out there, and they had them on the air for, I believe, the first time, at the first show we sent. And they got a call from a lady out there named Roberta Goodwin, who said Bob Bailey was her father. And that's how we found out where Bob Bailey is today and what he's doing. And I'm going to talk to Roberta Goodwin now, and we're going to talk about some of that and about some of the old days when they were producing yours truly, Johnny Dollar. Hi, are you there?
Yes, good afternoon. How are you doing?
I'm doing just fine. We heard about a year ago, I guess it was, the interview that you did with KREX. I believe we played it, in fact, here in Denver. So I'm going to cover some of that same ground, but I also wanted to ask you some other things as well. You were a small child then when he was doing this, right?
Yes, but around 9 years old, up until around 14, when he was doing this show, 14 or 15.
Did you accompany him the whole time, the whole range of those years?
No, actually, I started going down to the studio with my father when I had my learner's permit. He went down Sunday. We lived in Pacific Palisades. It was about a 20-mile drive down to Hollywood, down to the big KNX studios on Hollywood Boulevard. Now they've been turned into the CBS television studios when radio went out. But then I would drive him down and stay with him the whole day while they got the show ready to go on the air during the week.
What's the first memory you have of going down with him, and why did you start?
Well, a lot of it, like I said, I got my driver's permit. It was a nice drive, and I enjoyed it. I enjoyed being down there. And I think he was kind of hoping that the business showbiz bug would bite. It just never quite took.
You know, many actors and actresses don't wish that for their children. It's kind of a reversal of what you normally hear.
Well, my grandmother and grandfather were both in the acting business, and so I guess he was hoping that it would pass on to the next generation. He was born literally in a trunk, was on the stage by the time he was a year and a half old, was out in front selling theater bills for $5 a week when he was around 8 years old. So he came from a long line.
You say he was born literally in a trunk? How did that take place?
Stage in a trunk when my grandma and grandpa were on the road. They played in Virginia City, Piper's Opera House. They were in San Francisco at the time of the earthquake.
Mm.
So that was before he was born, but later they were still performing long after he was born. And also his brother was in show business, Edwin Bailey. He produced Truth or Consequences all the time it was on the air.
Jack Bailey?
No.
I remember Jack Bailey.
This was Jack Bailey did it. He was no relation. He was a friend. But Edwin Bailey produced the Truth or Consequences shows all the time they were on the air.
When was he born?
He was born 1913, June 13th, in Toledo, Ohio.
1913 was a pretty difficult time for a woman to have a baby under any conditions, but to have a baby backstage in a trunk was...
Well, not only that, she was 39 years old when she had him.
And what was his first part, as far as you can tell?
He was in Peck's Bad Boy. That was his first acting job on the stage, and all he had to say was, "I didn't do it."
That's right. Yeah, I remember you mentioned that at KREX. Do you know what he first did on radio?
No, I'm not familiar with that. I have conversed with another man back, I believe he was in Oregon, Washington, Oregon, and he sent me a list. He was in something called Holly Sloan. He was in Kitty Keene.
Holly Sloan was called the Story of Holly Sloan or something. I've heard of that. And Kitty Keene was called Kitty Keene Incorporated. That was a soap opera about a woman detective. All that was done in Chicago.
Right, and then he did Road of Life, Mortimer Gooch, Scattergood Baines, Brewster Boy, and Today's Children.
You don't know what parts he played in those?
I do.
Well, could you tell me?
He played Johnny Starr, funny, in Holly Sloan. He played Bob Jones in Kitty Keene. He played Dale Humphrey in Road of Life, Mortimer Gooch in Mortimer Gooch, Vern Sanders in Scattergood Baines, Phil Hayworth in That Brewster Boy, Richard Coles in Today's Children. And those were, like you say, I believe those were all in Chicago.
And then he played in the Let George Do It, as George Valentine.
In between that, he left Chicago to come out here under contract for 20th Century Fox. And he worked for 20th Century Fox, I guess, for a couple of years. During the war years, he was there. And while he was there, he made Jitterbugs and Dancing Masters with Laurel and Hardy. And then he made Ladies from Washington, and he made Wing and a Prayer, Eve of St. Mark, and Tampico with Eddie Robinson. And Sunday Dinner for a Soldier with John Hodiak. Then he went on to radio to do Let George Do It, which he played George Valentine.
Now that was, he did that on Don Lee, wasn't it? Don Lee Network?
That was, I think, KHJ. That was the call letters were KHJ, and that was downtown. All the big radio stations were within about a 4-block area, downtown Hollywood.
They pretty much had to be with all of the well-known actors skipping around, didn't they?
Yeah, it was a very quiet, small town back then, as I can remember. Nothing like it was when I left California. And everybody sort of ate at the same restaurant, and it was a group mixed together. The one would work at one station. A lot of times, I have a couple of the old scripts here, and I see where old people like Virginia Gregg and Jack Crucian, they were on several shows. Most of them, as a matter of fact. People would just work the same show, different characters.
Right. We were talking to Dick Joy, who was an announcer last week, and he was talking about the different roles that Hans Conried played. Some of the things that you don't even hear his name in the credits anymore. And I suppose all of these actors and actresses, Virginia Gregg, for instance, let's talk about her for a minute. I mean, she was a marvelous actress, and she had a whole range of talent. You knew her personally, didn't you?
Yes. She was. She sort of took me under her wing, as she was one of the only women that were there at the recording studio. So I just kind of sit beside her, and she loved to knit. Whenever she didn't have a script in her hand or she wasn't up in front of the microphone, she would sit there knitting. Of course, this is something you can do this on the radio. She might play 2 or 3 parts. She might be an old woman. She would be a little girl. Or she would just, use her regular voice. And this could all be in the same script. That was the marvelous thing about radio. I mean, you could be on there, you could be 5'2" and weigh 300 pounds, but you could be a handsome leading man.
Right. I turned up I don't know whether this was a union catalog or what, but it was a book of all of the West Coast players back in 1940. And there was a very young-looking Virginia Gregg, and in it said types of roles, and there was a whole list of things, from ingenue to Russian countess to all kinds of things. And then it said range of voice. Her voice span was from 8 years to 80. She could play any part in that range, and she did. She did.
There were others too. I can't remember their names. A lot of them went on to work in the cartoons. Well, I hear voices today behind some of the cartoon characters that I know and recognize, but I can't put names to them.
Well, you hear Bill Conrad all the time.
Yeah.
And you hear Paul Frees a lot.
Yeah, well, take Jack Crucian. I know he's doing a commercial. I just saw him a few days ago doing a commercial on the air. So.
Did you know any of? Did you know Conrad or Frees? I never heard those guys on Johnny.
No. Well, some of the people on Vincent Price did that show a lot. And, like I said, Virginia Gregg did it, and an actor named Stacey Harris. He went on to be in television, played a bad guy all the time. He's one of those people, if you saw him, you'd know him right away, but you don't know his name.
Right.
And Larry Dobkin, he went on to play a bad guy in a lot of television series. And there was Forrest Lewis. And I was looking at the script. There's a very young actor here, Dick Crenna.
Mm-hmm.
And we all know that he went on to television.
We just heard Dick Crenna on this show about a half hour ago on Miss Brooks.
Right. Well, he was doing Dad's show then, too.
Was he doing adult parts or mostly kids?
Oh, he was way down in the script. Doing, just what they call, I guess, bit parts, support parts.
I believe in one of the Johnny Dollars that we have played, Dick Crenna turns up as kind of a teenage hood or hoodlum.
There were so many. There were the two formats. There was the half-hour format, and then there were the 5-series formats. So,
the five a week format was just great radio. Have you had a chance to hear many of those that we've been sending out?
You know that I don't listen.
Uh-huh.
I don't know. I often wonder how other movie actors, children felt when they listened to something that used to be. It brings back memories, so to speak. You know, so much has happened to my father since then. Not all of it very pleasant. That sometimes I don't listen to them. Probably I should. My children do listen because I like them to know what he did. But I don't listen. out of a because it's a painful. Yeah, it is painful. Those were very good times, and like I say, afterwards, when radio died, and I mean it died with a big bang. It just died out there in California. They tried to move it back to New York, and when they tried to convert to TV, so many of the radio personalities couldn't make the conversion, and until other jobs opened up, like the sponsor jobs now, like the voice behind jobs now, there were a lot of radio stars that just went completely downhill. And especially, like my father, had nothing to fall back on. He'd been an actor all his life. And by the time his radio show was over, he was almost 50, and he weighed about 150 pounds, stood about 5'9.5", and they looked at him on television and said, "You're not Johnny Dollar."
Mm-hmm.
No. He said, "But I am. I've been." And they said, no, we have to get a 6-foot-tall guy that weighs about 200 pounds to play the part. Consequently, it never came to television, nor did Let George do it, although I have one of the first TV scripts that they were going to shoot for Let George do it. They shot part of it, and again looked and said, well, you just don't look the part, you know.
Don't look like that wonderful voice.
Yeah, and this happened to a great many radio artists. It was very, very sad, and it's only now, I think, that radio is coming back a little.
You know, I think some of the radio stars that were displaced by television are still have difficulty dealing with what happened to them.
Well, it was a whole way of life out there, outside of the movies. The movies had their group and their way of life. Well, radio was another whole thing. There were parties. And another thing about radio, you shot the show one day. You had the whole rest of the week off. And you could, go out and do what you wanted. And the 3 big studios that were down there are gone. They're just office buildings now. I think they tore one right down. You'd go down during the week and you'd see people lined up around the block. Each studio had maybe 3 huge auditoriums. People would go in to see Queen for a day.
Mm-hmm.
The consequences, these were all broadcast live. Most of the other shows were taped and put out over the air. But it was fascinating. You'd go in the front doors and there would be this huge booth. And it had a clock that showed clocks for each time zone. And this huge control board where he would send out all the programs to all the little small stations. So it was sad. It was a very sad time when TV just kind of just wiped it out, so to speak.
There was a prejudice against radio actors on the part of television producers when they came in. What I've read, at least, is that a lot of them were young whiz kids who came along and had a new toy, and they said, no, if you worked in radio now, you've got your own way of doing things, and this is TV. And actually, when you think that working in radio would give you a credential, back in the early 50s or mid-50s, it actually worked against you.
It did, because if you think of it, radio is an entirely different form of acting. You relied completely on the sound man, the sound mixer, for any sound effects that needed to be put in. Although you stood in front of the microphone, you would move your arms occasionally and act a little. All the acting was in the voice, in what came out from inside of you. You know, you could wheel someone up there in a wheelchair, and he would project over the radio his voice, his emotion. Where in television is involved, I won't say more acting, I'll say more physical acting.
More jerking around and moving, anyway.
Well, yes.
You know, I'm not just telling you this because you're on the air, but when we look at a series like Johnny Dollar, which had a great range of acting talent involved in it, your dad, I believe, as I'm trying to go from memory now, was the fourth man to play that part. Charlie Russell was the first, and then we had some real high-powered talent in Edmund O'Brien, and John Lund played it. And yet he was, to my mind, absolutely the best. And that says something, because Dick Joy and I were talking last week about, you know, getting things set in your mind. And the first Johnny Dollar I ever heard was Mandel Kramer, who came along after your dad. And to me, he was that part. And then when I started hearing Bob Bailey's version of Dollar on the air, it just, after a time, it just supplanted that. And now that series from roughly 1954, 55 through 1960 really stands out as the Johnny Dollar show.
Oh, thank you.
Well, I wanted to ask you, before I forget, your dad is in a convalescent home now in California.
After I received your call, I called him yesterday and spoke to him. And he was very, very pleased, very excited. He was almost as excited for me that I was realizing, well, what to say, some of his, you know, something he'd done was going on. And he'll be 70 in June, so since he suffered 10 years ago, he suffered a massive stroke which left him completely paralyzed on one side. His memory is slow, and he has trouble talking. But the tone of his voice is the same, just the same. You'd know right away it was him.
But for those of you, before you ask, I've already asked, he will not be able to do this kind of a thing. He will not be able to do this program.
Oh, he can, about 10 minutes, and he gets too tired. And like I say, some things he remembers like they were yesterday, and then other things he cannot remember at all.
Does he have any of his shows?
No, he doesn't.
Would he be interested in having them?
He has no way of playing them. It's like I say, he's in a rest home, and he's mostly paralyzed, so he has no way of playing them. And I'm wondering if he wouldn't be a little like his daughter, not to listen. Although he said he saw one of his movies on television the night before last, and he seemed to enjoy that.
If he had a way of playing them, and he had some of the tapes, I guess you just answered that question. You don't know whether it would be painful for him to hear them or not.
No, I don't. I would, I'd have to, we'll probably talk to him again.
Would you like to find out?
And I will find out when I talk to him again. I can give you his address, and I know he would appreciate even a postcard.
Okay, we'll give that address a couple of times for those of you who listened faithfully to the Johnny Dollar series that we played on KADX for 2 years every morning, and would like to drop Bob Bailey a card. Give me the address now, and we'll give it again a little later on.
Right, it's Robert Bailey, 44445 North 15th West, Lancaster, California.
Lancaster is like Burt Lancaster.
It's just like it.
93534. 44445 North 15th West, Lancaster, California, 93534. Is there any...
137 would be the...
Room 137?
Although it will get to him if you just... And that's the Antelope Valley Convalescent Hospital. That's a mouthful. Antelope, as in the animal, Valley Convalescent Hospital.
Well, if he would be interested in hearing his material, I have all but 4 or 5 of the serials, and I think probably 50 of the half hours. I have about 30 or 40 Let George Do It. And if we could get, maybe even get the Old Time Radio Club here involved. Now, I'm speaking for them and can't, but maybe we could find a way to get something to play them on. I would certainly be willing to make the shows available. So if you could ask him and get back to me.
I will definitely ask him, and I want to tell you this has really been a pleasure for me. I'm just beginning now to realize what an impact someone recording a show, you don't think a thing about it when it happens, and yet years and years later, 25 years later, here it is.
Yeah. Well, I, for one, am certainly glad that these were saved, because they are the best radio you find today. Virginia Gregg played a part on Yours Truly, Johnny Dollar, called, her name was Betty Lewis, and she played Johnny Dollar's girlfriend. And you told me on the phone that there was that there was a warm friendship between the two of them, and in fact between Virginia Gregg and your whole family.
Yes, she didn't live too far away, and her children went to school with my younger brother, so we developed a friendship. And since she was on the show, and she was is such a wonderful person. And then later on, she went on to do so much work with Jack Webb.
That's right. Show. She was on Dragnet. She used to play all kinds of different.
Oh yeah, and even now she'll pop up on TV. So I assume she's still working.
Yeah, I think I saw her a year ago in one of the credits on some television show. Listen, I think we have somebody calling.
Oh,
we have a call? Okay, we're going to take a break first? Okay, hold on. We're going to take a break first, and we'll come right back.
All right.
You're listening to the Old Time Radio Show on 71K News, the station that brings the world to you. Now back to Denver's Old Time Radio history buff, John Dunning.
Okay, and we are back, and I'm talking with Roberta Goodwin, who lives now in Grand Junction, having, I guess I could term it, escaped from California.
Exactly.
And we have a call. Okay, do I do this? All right, I'll get used. We change it every week. Line 1. Hi, this is John Dunning. You're on 71K News Talk Radio.
Well, Mr. Dunning, this is one of your constant followers since you've been on KADX and even before then.
Well, good.
And my question is, you were saying that my Sincerely Johnny Dollars started as a TV series back in the 50s. About how many episodes were filmed? You know?
Roberta, did you say it was actually, that it went into production, or that
No, it never got on the air. They had talked about it. My father even went to New York. They got him in front of the camera and decided the voice didn't match the body, and they never did cast anyone else because they felt no one else would be accepted. So it never got on the air.
So they never produced it?
No.
What? Then is it still open property then?
I would imagine that it would be the property of, CBS? Is that Canada?
I don't know. That's really open to question. When you get into a question of who owns these things, that's
who owned the character Johnny Dollar, I believe.
Well, Jack Johnstone was the writer-director.
Yes.
Did you know him?
Yes, I went to school with his daughter.
We'll talk about that in a minute. Did that answer your question on...
Yeah, and one unrelated question.
Okay.
Okay, briefly, was Frontier Gentleman ever done as a television series?
Not to my knowledge, no.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Yeah, I haven't given out the number. See, there you go. The number is 758-7100. And I'm at it again, constantly not giving out the number. And we're talking about yours truly, Johnny Dollar, and about Bob Bailey, who was certainly the best Johnny Dollar, as far as I'm concerned anyway. And we're talking with his daughter, Roberta Goodwin, in Grand Junction. What can you tell me about Jack Johnstone? Now, he was involved, I don't know if he was involved in the first show back in 1949, but he certainly was more closely related to that series than anybody else.
Well, all the time I was ever went down or being aware of the show, he was always there. He the two scripts I have, dated 55 and 57, both have his name down here as being producer-director. So, as long as Dad was there, he was there.
What do you remember about him and his directing methods?
Oh, he was marvelous to watch. He would sit behind a lectern on a high stool, and he would have the script in front. And sometimes he would remind me of a snake. He would weave back and forth on the stool, giving what they call cues. He would have to cue the music, cue a sound effect, cue the actor by rather pointing at them. And sometimes he'd be like an orchestra leader, and he would just... It was hypnotizing to watch him as he brought everyone together and worked everyone through. That's literally what he did. He was the director of the program. Like an orchestra leader, he orchestrated all these different individuals till they got the finished product. That, and he was a wonderful man.
Was he authoritarian?
Yes.
In other words, when he told you to do something, you did it?
Yes. When he said quiet, this was it, everybody knew that he meant it, yeah. And he was just had a wonderful personality.
How did he get along with your father?
Oh, got along very well. We dined at his house, and like I said, I went to school with his daughter, and we would, she'd spend the night at my house, I'd spend the night over at their house. It was, of course, to us, our fathers weren't any different than the plumber, the mechanic. We just accepted what was happening. This is what they did for a living, and it didn't mean anything to us. It was only later on, when I was in just beginning high school, that I met someone who was the head of my father's fan club. And I couldn't understand what it was. Every time she'd come in the house, she couldn't talk, and she'd get all red in the face. Just couldn't understand this. And suddenly I discovered there were fan clubs all over the United States, and he was getting all this fan mail. And just then it began to dawn on me that he was something different from just ordinary daddy.
Mm-hmm. Have you kept in touch with Jack Johnstone or his daughter at all?
Oh, unfortunately, I haven't kept in touch with any of that. Like I said, he had hoped that I would go into some end of the business, but I never did. And so when he and my mother separated, he literally dropped out of my life for 9 years, and I never even knew where he was. And at that time, that's when all the memorabilia was lost, all the pictures, all of that stuff. I just have the smallest little amount of it that I kind of retrieved by hook or by crook. So that's what I mean when I say there's some painful memories involved there too.
Mm-hmm.
So that that's how I lost complete touch.
I want to ask you a little more about that, but first I wanted to ask you: do you know if Jack Johnstone is still alive?
I don't know. He was a little older than my father, but not that much because children were the same age. As far as I know, it's the only way you could find out would be to go through, if they still have it, AFTRA, American Federation of Radio Television Actors, which used to be AFRA, American Federation Radio Actors, when it started in Chicago. They have a listing office where they would know out in California.
He wrote many of the scripts in addition to directing. I understand.
Yes, I'll tell you another writer they had. See if the name rings a bell. Robert Bainter.
Mm-hmm.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, I've got a couple of shows in which that name is given a credit. I believe I recall from your interview in Grand Junction.
Yeah. Here, I thought I was going to get away with one.
Robert Bainter is his middle name, right?
Robert Bainter Bailey.
Uh-huh.
In order for him to be able to do the scripts, he had to use Robert Bainter.
Because of union rules?
I think more along the line of studio rules. They didn't want to pay the writer and pay the actor all at the same time.
Oh, you mean he did the script gratis?
No, they paid him, but they paid him Robert Bainter for to do the writing. Most of the big offices were back in New York, so I don't know that they knew that he was the same. Or maybe they felt that it wouldn't sound right if they said Robert Bailey was acting in it and writing it too. Now, that's an accepted thing on television. It's a big thing if you produce it, write it, and act in it all at the same time.
Yeah, I know. I've heard a couple of radio shows in which that's done, but not very often. We have another call, and we got about 15 minutes left. Let's call it 15. 758-7100 if you'd like to ask anything about Bob Bailey that you've always wondered from hearing the shows. Yours truly, Johnny Dollar. Okay? Hi, it's John Dunning. You're on 71K News Talk Radio.
Oh, it's really a pleasure to get to talk to you and your guest. By the way, was it proved to your satisfaction that John McIntyre is still alive?
No, that was a question that came up last week.
Oh, I know that, and I guess I did not call you, but I passed a message on that didn't come to you, I guess. But he was on a special within the last 2 months that was done as a syndicated thing on Channel 2, but it was brand new, and he played with his wife, and they were shipboard passengers.
Well, that's great to know because...
On the show, he supposedly is having a heart condition, but it was a futuristic thing. It was rather interesting, as a matter of fact. It was a couple of nights, I think it ran. But he is alive, definitely.
Well, that was my mistake then, because Dick Joyce said he was alive, and I could have sworn that I saw in the paper that he had died a couple of years ago.
For change, they were very nicely groomed, and he in a tuxedo, and she in floor-length gown. They had been trapped under the sea in, what year was it?
Oh, that was a Channel 2 thing.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. And one other thing before I ask something of your guest that's on, was one of the shows you played today, Our Miss Brooks, one of the songs, or the song they sang, I shouldn't say one of them, was written by a cousin of mine.
Really? Which one was that?
And I suddenly drew a blank. Were they singing, was it I'll See You in My Dreams, or was it something else?
Yeah.
Yeah, that was written by my cousin, Gus Kahn.
Really? Your cousin is Gus Kahn?
Right.
What are you doing here? You should be out in Hollywood yourself.
Unfortunately, I did have a chance to write to his son only once, and I don't know what happened, but we never corresponded after that. He died before I ever had a chance to know much about him, because he died, I think, in 1940.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, every time I hear one of his songs, I sit and say, now that's talent. Wish I had it.
I bet you didn't ever expect to hear Jeff Chandler singing it.
No, it was. It really was.
Okay, well, what's your question?
Your guest, a little bit?
Sure.
Okay. Is it Mrs. Goodwin?
Yes, it is.
I was going to ask if you had brothers and sisters, too.
I have one brother who's living. He's out in California. For a long while, he worked in a rock band as a drummer. Right now, I'm not quite sure what he's doing.
And I think you said you also have children.
Yes, I have 2 children. My son is 17 and a half. I'm proud to say he'll soon be entering the Air Force. My daughter, 15 and a half, in school in Fruta.
Have they had a chance to get to hear some of their grandfather's tapes?
Yes, they have, and my son seems to have inherited that voice.
Really?
Wouldn't that be terrific? I kind of, frankly, I guess I didn't listen to it a lot when it was probably on the air, but I've listened to it when John has played it. I didn't get to hear it in the early morning times, but I got to hear it when you played it on Sundays. And I, too, would have to say that of all the ones I heard and remember some of the ones from earlier, I think your father was the very best, too.
Oh, thank you.
And I noticed, well, it's a little different year, but he shares the same birthday as my mother. Slightly different years. June 13th, didn't you?
Yeah, that made 13th. I've always considered 13 a lucky number. Yeah, I do.
Well, it seems to fall on Friday a lot for some reason.
Yes,
but
it does.
like anyone. But I think it's just terrific that you were located, and I didn't get to hear the other tape. I had heard that your father was in a convalescent home. I'd heard John say that on the air once, but I'd never gotten to hear anything of the other tape. So it's really a thrill to hear you, and I think it's just great that you got back in contact with your father and everything, and got a chance to go to the studio in those days. And
oh, thank you very much.
I wish that we could hear more old-time radio even than we do. We don't really get to hear enough of it, and those were really the days. And some of us who were at least young enough or old enough, whatever it was, to hear some of those things, we really had something great to remember.
Okay, well, thanks much.
Okay, thank you.
Your brother, did he participate in these trips down to the studio?
Oh, there's 8 years difference between us, so he was too young then. Going down, so I just went down.
You say he dropped out of your life for 9 years. Is this an element of his life that I can ask you about?
Well, in most cases I'd say no, but I think it might be good maybe it might help somebody. My father had a drinking problem, and for almost 22 years he controlled it by going to AA. But then when my mother divorced him and they separated, and when radio died and he saw his life kind of crumbling before him, he kind of gave up a little. And he went back to drinking quite heavily. And he lost his house and lost a car, and he couldn't hold down a job. And then he just drifted away. And I married, and I just I looked for him, but I was never able to locate him. None of his friends knew. I even tried through the studios and through the William Morris agency, all the different agencies, and nobody knew where he was. And then 9 years went by, and the phone rang one day, and then I picked it up, and he said, "Hello, this is your dad." And I said, "This is not funny. Whoever's playing this joke on me." And he said, "No, it's me." And he had been rehabilitated up at what they call Warmstink Rehabilitation Center. And for about 2 years, he was doing wonderfully. He was helping out at this rehabilitation center, helping other alcoholics to get back on their feet again. And then out of nowhere, he suffered a stroke. And since then, he's been in the rest home.
Mm-hmm. When you went down to the studio, which was KNX Los Angeles, was that attached to CBS, or that was the CBS affiliate?
That was CBS.
That was CBS
in? It was CBS, but it was the radio. Now, when CBS, it was Columbia Broadcasting System. But KNX were the call letters out in California. KHJ, KNX, KABC. These were the different call letters out there. So it was the Columbia Broadcasting System. Evidently, when they went on, did television, they just took CBS as their... KNX is still the radio station out there if it's still in existence. Although it isn't out there anymore. I don't know where it is anymore. But it is quite a big building. About 6 stories high. At
the time we're talking about now, which would have been in the late 50s, right?
Well...
Right up until 1962.
Yeah.
You did it on tape then, rather than live.
Yeah. They taped it. Some of the earlier ones were done live. He would go down and they would be done. Some of the half-hour ones were done live.
And we're talking about sound effects that were not live. I mean, they didn't have a band there, did they?
No.
They had them on cartridge or on tape.
If you can picture one whole corner of a huge, and I mean a huge room, and we're talking about 60 feet long by about 40 feet wide, completely covered with that acoustical tile from floor to ceiling, and then carpeted with very thick pile rugs so that no sound would be heard. One whole corner is taken up with about 5 or 6 turntables, a thing of bells that hung down, different doors that would open and close, big doors and little doors, cowbells, all sorts of paraphernalia, so the sound man could make any noise that he wanted to. And one joke went, there was supposed to be a special sound effect come on, and instead of the right sound effect at the right moment, you heard the flush of a toilet come over the air. So from then on, one of the jokes in the studio was if somebody made a mistake, you'd reach up in the air and pull on an invisible cord to simulate pulling on the toilet cord. That was the local joke in there. If somebody made a boo-boo,
that's up great.
And clunk, you know.
I've heard of guns failing to fire, but I never heard of an unwanted toilet making its appearance.
Right in the middle of a very serious scene, I guess, that I don't know what the other effect was, but he cued in the wrong effect and crunched it.
Wasn't a love scene, was it?
Well, you know how that's what the rumor is, but I don't know. This wasn't on my dad's show, but it went around all the different sound men, so that from then on any mistake was signified by pulling the cord up above your head. So, but, no, the sound man had quite a job.
When you went down there, you were actually in this big empty place. It was a Sunday morning, and you did the whole thing. And
the studio was closed, so I could run around all over the studio. You'd first go in, and everyone would sit around a huge table. The whole cast would sit around the table, have some donuts, have some coffee, and do a read-through. And then they'd do another read-through with a stopwatch, because they had to allow time for commercials, even back then. And then they'd do a walkthrough, and then they'd get ready to record it. Then I had to leave the room, go upstairs, and get in the sound booth. And then I would sit in the sound booth, where the sound, not the men who made the noise, but the men who recorded it. The engineers would sit.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'd watch the show up from the sound booth while they recorded it.
That's the reason they did it on Sunday? Is because
I don't know. It just happened that that was the day they did it. Was on Sunday.
It's because, it sounds like, because there was nothing else going on there. I mean, that must have been one of the last shows they were actually taping for broadcast.
No, I don't know. There were 3 or 4 huge rooms like this. This had nothing to do with the live shows like Truth or Consequences. Those could be going on, or Jack Benny. Those could be going on in another portion of the studio with people coming in the front door. The studios were so big, so immense, that you could wander in one whole end of the building without even getting near where they had the theaters to broadcast the live shows.
Mm.
And there were 3 or 4 of these huge soundproof studios that they would record these shows in. It just so happened that at that particular time it was cut on a, like the one show I have here was cut December 4th and aired December 22nd. It gives you an idea of the length and time between the two.
Right. How many times do you imagine that you went down there with him?
Oh, let's see. Over a period of time, I probably was down there maybe 50 times.
Do you have one...
School on Sunday.
I'm sorry?
About 50 times. You know, there was no school.
Right.
On Sunday, so I could go down on Sunday with him. The rest of the week, he later on did do some screenwriting and some television writing. And he wrote a series called Fury, which was a Saturday morning horse show for the kiddie set. And the local joke got to be, how much could the horse do exactly? What great thing could he do next week? He was under contract at MTN to do some writing. And if you ever get a chance to see Birdman of Alcatraz...
Oh, yes, I saw that.
All right, one of the reporters standing on the dock is my father.
No kidding.
No kidding. It was one of the last parts that he did before everything kind of faded away.
Look, we have one more call. Let me get this, and we've got about 5 minutes left. Hello, you're on 71K News Talk Radio.
You were mentioning doing this show on Sunday. It was broadcast on Sunday afternoon, and I was wondering if they broadcast the same episode they did on the Sunday morning, or were they...
You know, she said it was about 3 weeks apart.
Okay, but it actually was on the air on Sunday afternoon, around 4 or 5 o'clock.
Yeah, I believe you're right. But they actually recorded them about 3 weeks apart from broadcast.
Now, another question I have is, in a case like that where they had a star, do they have an understudy? Was there someone to replace him in case he became ill, or...
Do you know that?
No, if I hear him correct, that's why they were recorded a couple of weeks ahead of time.
Oh, so there was no need for an understudy
for anybody.
I'm sorry?
No understudy at all. Fortunately, he never did get sick, but in case, they were 2 shows ahead of themselves, so that there would be about a 2-week period. And then, if he did get sick, they would tape 2 shows in one day, so they'd always have something to fall back on in case of illness.
Okay?
Okay, thank you. My dog's going nuts. So.
Okay, thanks for calling.
Okay.
Listen, I got a couple of minutes. I want to ask you one thing, and that is that is there one memory of this experience that we haven't covered here in these questions that really kind of stands out?
Oh, I can't.
That's an awful question to ask somebody.
I've been thinking for days of all the things that have happened. I think the one memory is, the more I think of it, the sadder it is that type of radio had to leave us. That really, it was mind-challenging to listen. I remember listening to other shows. I had to sneak up at night to listen to Lights Out. And it was a very exciting time. And I'm glad now that I was able to share it. And equally glad now that the next generation is able to hear these shows, that a person like you can bring them back for us. And I'd like to see radio back again. I would give a lot of people an opportunity to get into the business who aren't pretty enough to get on the TV, so to speak. I was very sad when the demise of that kind of radio as we knew it.
Yeah. I don't think it's going to come back, though.
No, but at least we can be thankful we got people like you.
Well, we can be thankful. We still have collectors, and we have something like 20 or 30,000 shows now that are around. We have just a couple of minutes. I want to thank you very much for coming along, and I'd like you to hang on so I can talk to you a bit about where to contact me if your dad wants to hear some of this material.
All right, go ahead.
We are coming up to news. This is KNUS in Denver. It's 5 o'clock.